Welcome to the Popcorn Talk Network, for the online broadcast network that features movie discussion, news, and interviews. Press 1. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies. From the Popcorn Talk Network, the online broadcast network for movie talk, this is Inside the Documentary, featuring breakdowns and interviews about all the latest documentaries.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk. This is Inside the Documentary, and I'm your host, Fern Ronay, and I am joined by the director of the new documentary, Pursuing Happiness, Adam Schell. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I had the pleasure of previewing this documentary, and I watched it twice because I loved it. I laughed, I cried,
cool.
I analyzed the meaning of life. Like, these are all the things I love, and I was like, I love this. So it comes out March 20th. Let's just say it right now. March 20th, it'll be available. Go see it.
It'll be available on a platform called Tug.
Okay.
If you're familiar with Tug.com, which is a theatrical distribution platform that allows us to take the film into any market in the U.S.
Okay.
So that we don't have to have just the L.A., New York, which we'll probably have as well, but we then can screen it anywhere.
Anywhere. So how do you... It's T-U...
T-U-G-G.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So this all began in 2012 when you saw the first World Happiness Report and the United States was number 23.
Yeah.
Which I also find shocking because I think compared to a lot of other countries, we should be waking up and kissing the ground to live here. So that's pretty shocking. So you sent an email to 500 of your closest friends asking who the happiest person they know is.
Yeah.
And this sparked a Kickstarter campaign, which sparked a 2-year adventure odyssey around the country, interviewing over 400 people, and you gathered and interviewed and collected the happiest people in America for the documentary, and they include a cancer patient, a garbage collector, a double amputee. It's phenomenal. So you've received a number of accolades, including you got to give a speech at the UN.
Yeah.
Which
is very cool.
Exciting.
Yeah.
So that
very
was
cool.
in 2014. So this began in 2012. That was in 2014. By that time, had you interviewed everyone you wanted to interview?
Actually, what's interesting is the UN trip, the journey to the UN, was kind of the culmination of the filming process of the film, and not because we reached we got it. Right. It ended. We just literally had so much footage at that point. We were like, okay, we kind of have to stop and start editing.
Right.
And then everything else just kind of fell into place, and it was like, and we were just invited to the UN. So we kind of did that, and that was kind of like the last bit of filming that we did. Okay. Out on the road.
What a perfect way to wrap it up.
Oh,
it really came
about it.
Full circle. So of the 400 people that you interviewed, I mean, there are phenomenal people in this in the film, but I'm sure you had to cut 350 maybe? Is there anyone that you think of that you're like, God, it breaks my heart to...
There are a couple, actually.
Because I saw the UN video, and there were a lot of people who weren't in the film.
Yeah, there are a couple that we just absolutely loved. And I believe you saw a older cut, actually.
Okay.
Since then, the film has been, completed.
Okay.
And a lot more people appear.
Okay.
Some of them are very brief, but they're there.
You couldn't leave them out.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of one of my last things was I was like, okay, now I need to figure out how to get as many faces in the film as possible.
Yeah.
So, they have, brief moments, a comment here, a comment there, but they are in the film. But we literally cut segments on pretty much everybody we met and interviewed, and the amount of stuff that's actually on the floor in the editing room is about 5 times what's actually in the film.
So is there anything you can eventually do with...
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have goals to, provide something for
even
that,
like
all that footage.
StoryCorps, how there's those 3-minute kind of...
Right, whether it's online or, we're actually talking with some people that are very interested in using a lot of this content online and, doing a series and all that. And then there's also the idea of actually continuing this journey and going out and collecting more interviews.
Nice.
And so taking what we shot before mixed with more stuff, because part of the reason why we shot 400 people was because I'm a bit of a nut job, and like it doesn't end for me. I'm like, yes, and then I want, and I want to interview this, and I want that, and I want this, and so
who finally pulled the plug?
Nicholas, my producer, literally, I think we were in Florida, and we were wrapping up our last trip, and we were talking about going to the UN. And then I said, okay, so let's think about our next trip. And he looks at me and he goes, are you kidding me? He goes, do you know how much footage we have? We have to get to editing.
Right.
Like, this film will never get made if you stay on the road the entire time. And I'm like, good point.
So this is Nicholas Kraft, your fellow filmmaker,
Yes.
who before Pursuing Happiness, there was Welcome to, or is it Craftland?
Finding Craftland.
Finding
Yeah,
Craftland.
yeah.
And this came about because you worked with Nicholas's father, Richard
Correct.
Kraft, and he basically wanted to do this adventure where he and his son went on every roller coaster in America.
Yeah, I mean that was something they did
Okay.
throughout his entire Nicholas's entire childhood as kind of their summer journey.
Right,
They
because he
would
grew up with his mom. And
Right, he lived in Oregon and then came to LA. So that was something they did. And then the film itself came about later. Richard is a glutton for joy, and he's like a 45-year-old child.
Does
right?
he really have a huge Dumbo outside his house?
No, it's inside.
I was looking at the picture and I'm like, how? What is this?
Yeah, so that film was his idea was, let's make a film about all of this stuff that we've got. He's got these huge collections of Disney and all that kind of stuff. And what ended up happening was, he hired me to make the film, and as a filmmaker, I was like, okay, all this stuff is interesting, but what's way more interesting is why you collect it. And so it turned into this film about that pursuit of joy and all that, which was in a way the inspiration for this film. Mm-hmm. And what was cool was we traveled about 70. We didn't travel to all of them. The film toured about 75 film festivals. And one of the coolest things to hear when you have an audience in front of you telling you about your film is, this film really made me think about my life and how I bring joy into my own life. And I was like, oh my God, that's genius, that a film can inspire people to think about their own lives and really spark change in people.
Right.
And that's when I was like, okay, I want to do that again, but I want to do it on a much broader level, instead of just about one guy who you love or hate, and usually for the same reason. And I want to broaden it to a lot of different people and find out, do that same thing about how do a lot of people find happiness and joy.
Right.
And then, couple that with the booming industry of happiness you see it everywhere, right? There's 88,000 books on Amazon now with the word happiness in the title, right? And so I was like, I want to find everything there is to know about this industry, what's going on, why are we this? Why are we 23 on the UN's list of happiest countries? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's amazing. So it's a great question.
That's what sparked the film.
So before you were asking these questions, and before there was Craftland, you, at the very beginning, Adam Shell, the early years,
yes.
You grew up in Southern California, in Encino.
I grew up in Encino.
Were your parents, did they ask these kind of questions at the dinner table? Are you happy? Were you happy today?
The one thing, and it's actually interesting because I now have kids of my own that are 4 and 6, and this is one of the things that we always talk about. Okay, what do we talk about at dinner, right? And I remember when we were kids, we always used to do the best and the worst at dinner.
Like
so we're sitting around the dinner table, and it's like, okay, come up with the best thing that happened to you today, and then what was the worst thing that happened to you today. And I always loved that because it gave you an opportunity to really kind of reflect on your day and say, okay, here's the best thing that happened to me and why. And it gives you a chance to remember it, and you're forced to think about it too, because often we don't stop and think about those things.
Right.
And then the reason why I like, a lot of people will say, oh, let's not talk about the worst thing that happened to you, but I find that important because you got to process that.
Right.
And one of the things I learned making this film is you can't have happiness without sadness. It's almost like they're yin and yang. And in the film I say that the opposite of happiness is not sadness, it's actually depression.
Right.
Because happiness is enabling. You want to get up, you want to do things, you want to build, you want to create.
Right.
While depression is crippling, literally crippling. And so you have to experience the whole range of emotions. And in order for me really to discover the secrets to happiness, I really had to learn about fear. Because fear is the enemy of happiness. Because when you're fearful, you are, again, crippled. You know, you hold back. And if you're holding back and you're crippled in that state, you don't have, you know, access to really be happy.
Right.
And when you let go of that fear and you just really open your eyes to the world and say, you know what, I'm not afraid of anything. Bring it on. Like Gloria.
Right.
You know,
Amazing.
She's 28 years old, diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And she said, this is the best thing that ever happened to me.
Right. You asked her, so in the film you asked if you had a magic wand, you could take the cancer away. Her answer, I don't want to give too much away, you should see the film, but her answer was no. And she was so grateful for all the amazing people that she met.
Right.
She had such a sense of gratitude, even when she said, she hates the term, you know, someone's life got cut short.
Right.
That would take away from appreciating the time that she did have here. And she was incredible. She was one of the ones that made me bawl my eyes out.
Yeah, she's a true inspiration. She really is.
Amazing.
It's actually interesting because when we started this project, Nicholas was kind of on board. You know, he was just out of college, so he didn't really know what making a film was about. And he actually started out as an intern for my production company, and then he just kind of really ran with it and really got it. But that day was one of the very first interviews we did, and I took him. I said, we're going to go interview my friend Gloria. And he's like, oh, tell me about it. I'm like, just wait. And he literally sat there with his mouth wide open that whole interview. And afterwards he was like, okay, I get it now. I'm in. I'm 100% in.
I have in my notes it had a profound effect on Nicholas. So he, so he was like,
it had. He was a changed man. He still talks about that day. He's like, oh yeah, that day with Gloria changed my life.
Yeah.
And after that, we spent subsequent days with her as well. But that first day, that's actually the first scene of the film. It changed his life.
Amazing. Yeah. So you knew her before?
Yeah,
through your wife.
She's a good friend of my wife.
Okay.
She was one of my wife's mentees at the law firm that they both worked out. They're both no longer there, but and so I knew her before cancer, before everything.
What was she like before cancer?
She was a fighter. You know, she always had that in her. She was like, I'm going to be president one day. That was Gloria. She was like, I'm going to be, first it's mayor, then it's city council, or first city council, then mayor, and then, and she had it all mapped out. And she was like, I'm taking over the world. You know, so when she got diagnosed with the disease and it all flipped on her, she had that same passion, but it totally changed. It was like, she wasn't running and gunning for those accomplishments anymore.
Yeah.
She was just like, I get it now. I get what life's about. And it's about all these experiences. And, you know, she talks about that in the film, too. When I said, what would you say to pre-cancer Gloria?
About her professional goals,
Yeah, she's like, it's not all that.
So she was still the same person.
Oh,
still
yeah.
the same. So do you think people are born with that? Because she was obviously very bright and able to kind of reposition what she's going through and look at it a different way. Do you think people are born with that ability or born happy?
There is definitely, and there's scientific evidence that people have different baselines for happiness. You know, if you put it on a scale of 1 to 10, you could say, okay, well, your baseline is a 6 happy, right? And that's kind of where, when everything else falls away, you kind of, fall back to that baseline, right? And we can work to elevate ourselves above that baseline and live above that baseline, or we can not work and live below that baseline. But I truly do believe that you can't actually change that baseline. Like, that's how we're made. That's our makeup, right? But you can really augment yourself to live above it.
Right.
And in effect, you're basically changing it, right?
Right.
But you can train yourself. I mean, the brain is so incredible. It's so so powerful.
It's amazing. That's like that life coach who said, if someone broke your heart, you should say, if that's what you want, I'm happy for you, which is so hard. I didn't say it was easy. But I thought that was so fascinating because it's so, I always say happiness is the best revenge. And the irony is,
it is, right?
When you're happy again, you don't care anymore.
Right.
And you do say to that person, if that's what makes you happy,
go do it. And you're right. I mean, he brought up that example, which I'm glad you brought that up, because people always ask me, what did you learn during this process? What did you discover? And that moment in the film was really one of the biggest discoveries that I made. And we're standing there on the beach, and he's Gary Van Warmerdam is his name, life coach, really great guy. And he says to me, your expression is your experience of life. And I immediately took that as, oh, you mean like karma, like what you give is what you get. And he goes, no, you don't have to wait for it to come back to you. Like, as you give it, that's your experience. So if you put hate out into the world, right there and then, you're experiencing that hate.
Right.
And if you put love out into the world, right there and then, you're experiencing that love. And that is what really makes us up, what fills our bodies and souls, right, is those moments. And so that was really something that opened my eyes. I was like, I never thought about that before. It's really a profound thing to think about.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's such a great lesson that, you know, I'm a writer and will be experiencing rejections and, you know, hurtful commentary, and you know, not everyone's going to love your book, not everyone's going to love what you write.
Right.
And it's so easy to get angry and want to hunt the person down. But the lesson is, thank you for reading my book. Thank you for even bothering to comment, which is, then I'm experiencing a positive experience no matter what.
Yeah, you just say thank you for that, and, you know, I'm glad you have an opinion. And that's it. And, and you walk away. And then you turn to the person that says, I loved your book, and you say, okay, give me more.
Yes. So everything began, let's go back to the beginning where this began. Everything began in LA. Yeah. And you you started with Gloria. And then you moved up to, was it Oregon?
Well, what we did is, to start the film, I kind of said, okay, well, I'm going to make this film about happiness, and I really want to meet happy people, because that's what I want the film filled with. So I said, who are the happiest people I know? I just kind of turned to myself and said, okay. And the very first interview we actually did for the film is one that is with Ken Brecker, and he tells the story about the tribe. Yeah, he's amazing, and he really is one of the happiest people I know.
Oh, I could tell.
And it was the very first interview we did, and I don't think he knows that, because I was like, hey, I'm making this documentary, and it's about happy people, and you're one of the happiest people I know. Do you mind if I come interview you? I didn't say, hey, I want to make this documentary, I need to start somewhere. Not that he would have said no, but it was really cool, because that interview ended up in the film, which is kind of has this cool meaning for me of like, oh, the very first interview we did ends up in the film. So that interview and Gloria, and there were several others that are scattered about, were the first interviews we shot around LA, and we kind of was like, oh, we're getting some interesting stuff here. So as a proof of concept, Nicholas and I decided we'd take a road trip. Just like, okay, the idea is travel the country, but let's start small. Okay. So we just got in my car and we drove up to Oregon, where Nicholas lives. Okay. Not lives now, but he grew up in Oregon. And so he was like, I know a whole bunch of people in Oregon, and I knew a bunch of people in Northern California. Okay. And then we did a bunch of research to find some, you know, psychologists and some professors at Berkeley and at Davis, and we just got in the car and scheduled a bunch of interviews and called a bunch of friends and said, hey, we're looking for happy people. Who do you know? And it worked. I mean, it worked really, really well. And every day was so exciting. I remember we'd get in the car after interviews one day, and we'd just be so jazzed. On speakerphone, we'd call either his dad or my wife or somebody. Aww. We'd be like, okay, here's what happened today. And we'd tell them these stories, and they're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And so that worked really well. So after that trip, we came back and we cut a bunch of stuff together from that trip and the stuff we'd done in LA. And we launched our Kickstarter campaign. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then that brought you to Boston, and then
so that was what really took us out of our own, because after that trip, we had pretty much exhausted everybody we know. Right. You know, and we're like, okay, now what? So that's why turning to social media and Kickstarter was so great, because 328 people came and backed the project. Yeah. And not only gave us money, but said, hey, go interview my grandmother or my friend or my aunt or my uncle, you know. And it was so cool, because that's really what, you know, put the whole thing together. And then we just literally started plotting people on the map and saying, okay, we got this person here, this person there, this person there, this person here. And we drew lines of how to get everywhere.
How did you mapped it out by region? Yeah. Like, so how many trips did you take?
We ended up taking 2 long trips. Okay. And so we literally, and we had a third in mind, which I told you about. He wouldn't let me take. One day I'll get there.
There's happy people you have to get to.
Right? There's a lot of them. I was like, but there's more happy people out there. We need to know them all.
So it was mainly, so you flew and then you drove.
Yeah, so we flew, like our first trip, we flew into Boston and then drove in a very curvy line to St. Louis. And then the second trip we flew into Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And drove in a very curvy line all the way to Florida.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
So traveling is so much fun. It's always the most fun, I think, the first 3 days, and then you want to kill people. So did you ever want to run Nicholas over with the car?
I have to say no, I didn't. It was such a pleasurable experience. One thing I have to say is Nicholas was such the right person to make this film with. Partially because he had just graduated college and he knew nothing about making films, and so everything I taught him was all he knew.
Right.
so there was that. So I was like, yeah,
Jesus.
Right. Exactly.
He was your disciple.
You said it. But also he was just game for anything, and he was just totally got on my ride and said, I'm in, let's go. And you have to admit, this is a crazy idea. I'm going to travel the country and look for the happiest people in America. Like, what?
Right.
How are you? Yeah, how is that going to be a movie?
What'd your wife think?
She was like, great, go, get out of here.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, she was very happy for me that, we had put this project together. I'd been talking about it for a while. And so having it all kind of come together finally, she was very supportive, and she was like, nice. I got the kids, I got home,
nice.
Go have fun,
Perfect.
And get it done.
Perfect.
Yeah, it was great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
She sounds like a happy person, even though she's a lawyer.
Even though she's a lawyer.
I can say that.
Yeah, no, she's a very happy person.
Yeah.
She's not your typical lawyer.
Yeah.
She's a tough woman. She's very smart, and she's got all that together. But yeah, she's definitely. How could you live with me and not be a happy person?
It's infectious. So so when you got to Boston, one thing I noticed, some of these common threads. I loved Mario the shoe guy, and I noticed some of the things he was doing, like he's putting the pasta in the water, and he's like, one for you, one for me. They had this element of silliness.
Yeah.
And then you went to the Vedanta Society and ended up fixing their hot water pipe. Like, it was so random and so silly. And so I feel like some of the happiest people I know are the silliest people I know.
Yeah, there's definitely... Look, happiness comes in a lot of forms, right? But part of to me, one of the secrets to happiness is you can't take everything so seriously, right? You've got to be light and be fun, and that's what joy is, right? And people always ask, what's the difference between happiness and joy? Joy is that.
Right.
There's this great moment in the beginning of the film where we talk to Dr. Rick Hansen.
Yes.
And he says, he's a neuropsychologist. And so it's like, what's going on in the brain with happiness? Yeah. And he was like, well, let me tell you about happiness, right? He goes, happiness is two different kinds of things. There's hedonic happiness, which we all know as, eating good food, right. The Kings win for me,
right.
Or, having good sex, all that is like hedonic. It's very pleasurable. It's very, endorphins, And then there's eudaimonic happiness, which is that happiness you get from living a good life, right? Having children isn't necessarily always a hedonic, happy endeavor,
right?
But it's fulfilling. It's, it brings you a level of joy that's like, it just fills you up. It makes you feel like you've had a full life. And so I think that's really important to know, is that it's not all sugar and candy,
right?
That there is depths to it, and tapping into that stuff is like, so the silliness, that's very hedonic, right?
Yes.
But the other stuff is what really fills you up, because if you didn't have all the deep stuff, that feeling good about yourself, and that's where taking care of people, and we see that a lot with the guys in Detroit, for example.
I love them. Sit on it, Detroit, look it up. It's awesome.
It's amazing. They're who would believe we'd find this happiness in Detroit, right?
Yes.
But here's these two guys that are just taking care of a problem, and they're saying there's no benches at our bus stops, and old people and nurses and kids are standing there waiting for buses for hours on end, and they have nowhere to sit. So out of garbage wood, they're building these benches.
Right. It's amazing. With books underneath. When they lifted up, free library underneath, I was like,
and then it's guys. Like you just add that. It's
amazing. It was amazing. So going back to Rick Hansen, those two kinds of happiness made sense to me. And yes, the silliness would be the hedonic. And then I can't stop thinking about, now his name is John Lawson.
Oh, yeah.
His experience.
John
We'll talk
Lawson.
about him in a minute, but he
Yeah.
experienced some of the worst things a human can experience.
Yeah.
And yet he was so silly with his daughter.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's this element of, adding this humor to your life every day makes
Yeah.
it happy no matter what.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that is one pathway to happiness is through humor. I mean, there has been a lot of studies and a lot of stuff about laughter and smiling. You know, a smile is contagious.
Yes.
We had this great experience where there were so many times when we were pulling stills for things for the film to, put on the website or whatever, and we always want to get that still of somebody smiling. I mean, if you
Right.
look on
Yeah,
our
yeah.
websites, all the stills are people smiling. So you're going through the footage and you're like, okay, I need to find that spot where they're smiling, and you're like scrubbing through and you're like kind of going like this, trying to get them to smile.
Right.
And then you finally find that still, and then all of a sudden you just go, that's it.
Yes.
It's that contagiousness about a smile or about laughter
Yes.
that just you almost can't stop it. You can't help it. And when you just smile, they did these great studies. I don't know if you've heard of this, where you take a pencil and you put a pencil in your mouth sideways, right, like this,
Okay.
and you hold it there, and then they would give you a bunch of questions to answer. And then you would take a pencil in your mouth and you put it like this. And when you put the pencil in your mouth like this,
Oh, when you're forced to smile.
you're frowning.
Oh,
But when
okay.
you put
I
it
thought
like
that was
this,
forced to smile. Oh.
you're forced to smile, right?
Oh, I was thinking the opposite.
Right. But, well,
Okay.
when you actually see it,
Yeah.
it's,
Yes.
and people's reactions, people's surveys,
It's amazing.
the questions they answered them differently.
Amazing.
Just by that
Yeah.
expression.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there
Yeah.
is a part of life that it's like, if you just add a little humor, and like John says, he's like, I go to humor. And he
amazing.
takes a tragedy.
Amazing.
I mean, a piano player
Amazing.
at 30 years old who loses both his hands,
Yeah.
and what's he do? He's like, screw it, I'll be a comedian.
Amazing.
And then he does comedy about the fact that he doesn't have
Right.
hands.
And then he made a joke about his first wife leaving him.
Yeah.
She wants someone with a slow hand. And then he meets a wonderful woman. They get married, fall in love, get married, have a child. And then she passes, which was the point when I lost
Yeah.
it. I was hyperventilating. I'm
Yeah.
like, how much more could happen to this beautiful man? And then he played the piano. I can't play. I have all 10 fingers. I can't play a note.
Right.
And it was amazing.
Right.
And I was just blown away.
I did not expect that to happen. He didn't tell us beforehand that he played the piano or whatever. And we're standing there with him, and I sat down and played the piano, and he was singing, and we were jamming, and then his daughter sat down and they were singing together. And then she turns and she's like, play. And I was like, you're kidding, right? And he sits down and then he plays that piece.
Incredible.
And I was floored.
Incredible.
And you get that from watching it. The same
Yeah.
emotion happens when you watch
Yeah.
it. But
When
yeah.
he does talk about the loss of how you feel the music through your fingers, and there's definitely a loss there.
Yeah.
And it was really impactful. Do you feel like I felt like you can experience that loss, you can experience these down feelings and still be a happy person?
You have to.
Yes.
You have to. You can't. I mean, listen, we're human, right? And all these emotions and all these different feelings that we have are part of being human. And my thing is, if you don't experience them, you're not living.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to experience the downs. And listen, we all experience tragedy, right?
Yeah.
It's different for every one of us. Some of us lose our arms. Some of
Right.
us have cancer. Some of us lose family members.
Right.
Some of us, whatever it is, you're gonna experience tragedy in life. And the point of it all is, how do you go from that experience of tragedy
Mm-hmm.
back to that place of happiness? And you have to live there for a minute. You can't just turn around and say, oh, I'm not going to feel that.
Right. You
Right?
have to
Because you
honor
have to feel it. In my head, I always say, you got to move through these things. You got to feel that pain.
Mm-hmm.
You got to feel the hurt. You got to feel that stuff. But when you felt it, okay, move on.
Right.
Right? Let's get back to living life and
Right.
enjoying. And, if you lose a family member, for example, it's like, honor them. I always tell my
Yes.
wife, I said to her, if I die before you, don't have a funeral for me. Throw a party.
But I tell my husband, I say, don't be sad. Like, that would break
Yeah,
my heart.
right?
Be happy. Just, that would be a
Celebrate
gift to
my
me.
life.
Right.
Don't mourn the loss of me.
Completely,
Right?
yes.
Because I brought something to
Yes.
this world. I brought something to your life. Let's honor that.
Right. And you want your loved ones to be happy.
Yeah, exactly.
So I also noticed a couple other common threads. When I saw the sign outside Bowbridge City Hall, I'm like, who's happy at City Hall?
Right?
I can't imagine. And they were adorable, and the mayor was hugging everyone.
Yeah.
And then you went to the one woman's mom's house, which was great. And what I loved about the mom was she had there was such a peaceful energy to her. And I noticed in her house, the bedroom door was open and the bed, things were like not perfect. And I think there's such a connection between not being a perfectionist and being happy.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, listen, you gotta live, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes being a perfectionist and needing everything to be perfect takes away from that. I mean, that house you're talking about, what you see in that clip is the whole house.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. That through that door where you see, I don't know if you noticed in that shot, there's like 4 beds in there.
Okay.
And there's just barely enough room to walk between them.
Okay.
And she raised 5 or 6 children in that house.
And they never felt like they,
They never wanted for anything.
Right.
They never needed for anything.
That was so
and I'll
sweet.
tell you why. I'll tell you why they never wanted. Because the love and the warmth that was in that house, they didn't need any more than that.
Yeah.
And there's that whole section in the movie with with Michael Norton from Harvard where he talks about money and happiness and the relationship we have that we're always trying to get more and more, and it doesn't bring us more happiness. Once you hit that certain threshold, which I think is about $90,000 for a family of 4, like once you hit that threshold, like you don't get happier with more money.
Right. Right. I think my husband and I have talked about this. We think money makes you more of who you already are. So if you're a jerk and you have a lot of money, you end up with a lot of money. You're going to probably be a bigger jerk. But if you're a giver and a good person and you end up with a lot of money, you're going to be even more giving.
Right.
Speaking of giving, Randyland blew me away. What was your first impression of him?
Well, so when we first heard about Randy, we were staying with a friend and she said, okay, you have to go to Randyland. And we're like, what's Randyland? She goes, just go there. And so we show up and nobody was there. All the gates, it's that first shot. All the gates are open, everything's open,
like,
and it's like color everywhere. This guy used more color on this house than you could possibly imagine. And he is such a colorful character. So when we first got there, we cut this out of the film, but we first got there, he wasn't there. We came back the next day and we met Mac, his partner. We're standing up on the roof at the end there talking to Mac.
Yes.
That was the next day.
Okay.
And then we had to come back the next day to meet Randy.
Okay.
We were scheduled to leave town, and I was like, we're not leaving town. We are staying to meet
Thank
Randy.
God you did, because he is one of the best characters. Right? He's amazing, and his story, I don't want to give too much away, but he tells the story of growing up with a lot of brothers and sisters. They didn't have Christmas presents, and he is just an incredible person, and his partner said happiness breeds happiness, which I also think is true. He's something to see. I almost can't even describe him. You just have to see
You
the
literally
movie.
Can't describe him. I mean, go on the internet and search Randyland.
Yes.
That's all.
and go see Pursuing Happiness.
Well, yeah, of course.
Of course.
Of course.
And then also I just wanted to talk quickly about Richard Sherman. I loved when someone, he's a composer for Disney. He's written Mary Poppins, Winnie the Pooh.
Yep.
Someone crudely asked him in a seminar, how much money did you make from Winnie the Pooh? And his response was perfect.
It was genius, right?
And it was a connection to Jessica McClure, the young girl when she was 1.5 years old, fell into a well in Texas, and she sang Winnie the Pooh with her mom while she was stuck down there. And then when she came up, she wanted to thank Winnie the Pooh, and he said, I'm going to cry. He said, that made me the richest man in the world. So he's incredible. So did you get to spend a lot of time with him?
I've known Richard, and he's a good friend of Nicholas and his father. So I've known him through them for a long time.
The Craftland connection.
Yeah, the Craftland connection. But spending that day with him when he was sitting there,
amazing.
What's not in the film, sadly, because we just couldn't afford all the rights to all the music, right? Was he sat there for a couple hours and played all these songs for us. So
awesome.
we have him playing Winnie the Pooh, we have him playing, It's a Small World, we have him playing, Mary
amazing.
Poppins and A Spoonful of Sugar. It was amazing. It was so cool. It was like, I was dying because I'm like, these are the songs I grew up on, and here's the guy who wrote them playing them for me right here. It's like,
it's surreal.
Like, how does it get better?
I wonder if Jessica McClure knows. Does she know how that made him feel?
I don't know.
I feel
don't
like
know. Hopefully she'll
gonna
see the
have to
movie.
contact
Yeah,
her
send her the
and
film.
let her know. So it was incredible. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
What an amazing film, and I hope
Thank
everyone
you.
sees it. I feel like they should show it in middle schools and high schools and
Well, that's part of the
colleges.
distribution plan. Is one of the first things we're doing is we're releasing an educational version, so that it can get out to
Awesome.
schools and high schools. And we've had a lot of requests actually from educational institutions all over the world
Awesome.
to screen the film. So
Good.
it's really, really cool.
Awesome. Congratulations. What's
Thank
next?
you. Next is more
More
of this.
happiness.
Hopefully,
Good.
that's my stated goal at the beginning of making this project was I want to make this film and I want as many people as possible to see it, because I really do believe it has profound effects on people. I mean, you watched it twice.
Yes, I loved it.
And so that's kind of like the next thing for me, where we've created this whole independent distribution plan. We're working with a company called Passion River Films. They're
Okay.
handling a bunch of it, and then we're doing a bunch of it on our own.
Okay.
And so that's really my next thing, is to really make sure that this film has a life and it helps people, and it
Sounds
really gets
good.
out there.
Congratulations. So where can people find more on the internet?
So the best place to go is our website, which is pursuinghappiness.com.
Okay.
And you can find us on Facebook at Pursuing Happiness the Movie, and Twitter, PH Documentary.
Okay.
So those are the places where you can
Sounds
find out
good.
all the information. And beginning next week, it'll be available for screenings. You can sign up and bring it to your town, and have
Fantastic.
screenings and all that kind of stuff. So,
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Adam
thank
Schell.
you. This was great.
This was Inside the Documentary on Popcorn Talk. I'm your host, Fern Ronay, and thank you for joining us.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.